Right, last speech. So there's 7 slides, 2 videos, and I'll try and change your life because those 7 slides, what's on those 7 slides and 2 videos changed my life, which sounds really dramatic and completely over the top, but follows Rod's speech entirely, actually, and maybe gets to the core of why I was unhappy. So as that great introduction, yeah, I did all that stuff, and I was actually here probably 6 years ago talking about this stuff, working with all these people, used to run my own commercial agency, sold that, and then last 10 years in the charity world. So just driven all the time, doing stuff, more and more stuff, on to the next success. And as mentioned, the Cycling World Championships, I cycled up Mount Ventoux 6 times in a day and became the oldest Briton to do that. So constantly driven. And I realized, I knew that I was a perfectionist. It was pretty obvious. I'd work 24/7. I couldn't praise anybody at work whatsoever because no work was ever good enough. I couldn't delegate any work anyway, so there was no point. In fact, I struggled at Comic Relief with it. They gave me a secretary for the first time in my life, and I just had nothing to give the secretary to do. I had to do it all myself. And so I knew I was a perfectionist at work, and I knew that I came home and I'd argue with my wife so much that we split up twice over the last 24 years. And we're happy now. Weren't happy then. And I knew that I was doing everything to prove myself good enough, and in my case, to my dad, which is why I was on a bike, because my dad was on a bike when he was bringing me up, and I hated it and never saw him. He would always be out riding, and coincidentally, I did exactly the same to my kids. We have 4 kids. So I knew I was a perfectionist. I knew I was proving stuff to my dad. I knew that I argued with my wife. I knew I wasn't generally happy, even though I'd done all that ton of shit, had loads of money, big house. And then I had an epiphany moment. I was trying to write a book about how you could go from having nothing. I left school with nothing to achieving lots. And it was while I was away working in a little beach hut in Bournemouth, only in January this year, that I came across this, Obsessive Compulsive personality disorder, which essentially is the personality disorder of perfectionism and all the associated traits. And that is me. And it is now seen and announced this year as an epidemic amongst young people. And we will all be affected by this in some way. I'm a perfectionist. I'm married to one who's partly a perfectionist. Kids, obviously lots of millennials are perfectionists, bosses are perfectionists, startup founders are definitely perfectionists, cyclists are definitely perfectionists. That was where it really hit me, is when I was in the World Championships and I was doing all right, but everybody who beat me was completely and utterly obsessed. They had nothing else in their life apart from this bike, because cycling offers that potential to have the perfect moment. If you train hard enough, you can get the results. There's nothing else in between. And apart from your wife and your 4 kids. And I thought, I don't want that life. So I've spent the last year researching this, reading up on it. We had a group at my house last night with 12 people, which is really in-depth, open conversation about how perfectionism has affected their life. And it was really inspiring ending. And so where it comes from, perfectionism is a personality disorder that you don't know you have. Essentially, by the time you're an adult, you just know that you need to make most things perfect in your life. And where it comes from is your feeling at some point while growing up of not feeling good enough for some reason. And in a huge amount of cases, that is when the parents have split up. And I'll come to some celebrity stories in a moment. But for me, it was looking shit and asking girls to go to dance and no one ever saying yes. And the other one was where my teachers would literally say, I am doomed to failure. Failure is looming over him unless he gets down to some work. And I didn't. So I had years of reports like that, could do better. And we had some family moments that weren't great. But generally, I had a pretty normal family I'm 55, so growing up in the 60s and 70s, my father was very arm's length. I'd never really see him. He'd just be the perfect dad off cycling or building a whole house at the back of the garden or doing something brilliant and amazing that I could never do. And so I felt I wasn't worthy, and I grew up feeling like that and feeling like I just had to make it perfect. And lots of people. So now it's been seen as an epidemic because lots of people feel like this, and lots of people turn to shopping and buying stuff to feel better. Lots of people turn to alcohol and drugs and religion and different things to feel better. And now it's over 5% of people, 1 in 20 people, turn to perfectionism. They not aware of this when you just want to make everything just right. So this is what happens when you, this is what you look like to other people. This is actually my wife speaking over a video of me.
It's almost impossible being married to Chris. We are really struggling. At work he's the boss and everyone has to agree with him. But if I don't, he says I'm the only person who doesn't think he's any good. Too many of our conversations end in an argument and I feel useless. It's hard work being married to someone who always thinks they're right. He doesn't ever relax and just be content with what he has achieved. He's a frustrated and frustrating workaholic. He doesn't get it when I'm joking. He can go quiet, which I assume is because I must have said something wrong. He disappears to ride his bike. It's when he seems most contented, when he's away from us. When he comes back, children don't know if he's going to be happy, Dad, or annoyed with them. Is he going to play with them, or is he going to be picky about something that doesn't really matter? He can't seem to stop himself saying exactly what he thinks, and sometimes that hurts. The truth can hurt, but he doesn't seem to see that. When I need some emotional support to cuddle perhaps, he just gives me advice. I don't want any more bloody advice. It feels like we're a hindrance to him, like we're getting in his way. We always have to do what he suggests. There's almost no room to discuss it. Although, to be fair, we normally have a good time when we do go out. He has good ideas. It doesn't feel like we see enough of the real him, just this driven, determined force of nature. He's done so many amazing things, but he won't stop until he's the best. It feels like he's trying to prove himself to everybody, all day, every day. At our worst, we've had some very bad, very loud arguments that the kids overhear. We end up just arguing about the argument. We go into ridiculous detail and forget what we're arguing about in the first place. It's driving me mad, literally. We are hurting the kids. I hate what it must be doing to them. It is difficult to love him, but I do love him. We all love him, but we just can't go on like this. I just really wish Chris could be happy with us and happy with himself, to be contented, to relax, to know that we all love him.
I mean, that's deep. So that small child inside, that is society. I'll tell you, within a year, because I've worked at Common Relief, I know, and I was back in there discussing this last week, everybody will be recognising and discussing perfectionism, because they have to. Because as an adult, you come across as just a pain in the fucking arse, because you're just right all the time, because you've just thought, if you have an opinion about anything, then you've thought about it to such a degree that it has to be right. So if your wife tells you it's not quite right, you have an issue with that. So you're controlling, you're obsessed, you're a workaholic. A thing that people don't realize about perfectionism is it's all or nothing. It's not necessarily, you're not a perfectionist about everything. Like our house is a tip, our garden is a tip. As someone said last night, their garden is a tip. I can't be a perfectionist, but he works 24 hours a day on work. So a perfectionist will only do something if they feel they can achieve perfection or make it absolutely brilliant. Otherwise, they don't want to know at all. So neither me or my wife ever pay the bills because no one can care about the money at home or the situation of it. So we don't do it. So it's all or nothing. It's not everything, and that's a huge misunderstanding about it. So you're guarded, you're frugal, because essentially your whole life is about proving yourself good enough. And so anyone who says anything different is getting in the way of you proving yourself good enough because you feel you're making the right decisions all the time. And you're frugal to stop yourself going back to that position again. As soon as you've worked your whole life to stay away from it. So it is an epidemic, and we have, so these are celebrities. So one of the nightmares is that social media attracts perfectionists, obviously, because you can sit there and you can curate the perfect post. So Kim Kardashian. So all these people have at some point written about it, but they're not known for it. Sport is obviously a massive area. That if you're an 18-year-old who wants to go on and play sport, no one tells you are literally competing against completely obsessed individuals. But there are some amazing stories. Victoria Pendleton, the opening page of her biography is her dad taking her cycle training when she was 15, up a hill, the same hill every day, and he would ride ahead. He would never look back at her. And literally the last line on the opening page is, all I wanted him to do was turn around and tell me he loved me. And last month she tried to climb Mount Everest. And now she's on to another sport. She won't stop, she can't see it. Hopefully through campaigns and this sort of stuff over the next year it will help people. Lots of geniuses, people that we admire are perfectionists. Brian Wilson is my absolute hero for the singer-songwriter of the Beach Boys, had a horrendous childhood. But for all the geniuses that we see up there who've given over their lives to create amazing work, they're the 999, in that case musicians, of equal perfectionist type who don't achieve anything. And they're the people that are really struggling, the people that have no control over their perfection. And that's where we've seen now the epidemic of suicides, student suicides, 95 students in the last year. It's horrendous, and I've got 4 kids, so I'm very aware of the situation. Self-harm amongst girls has moved, nearly doubled in 10 years. Hospitalization from self-harm is 10 times bigger in the last 10 years. I don't know if you know the story of the 18-year-old British snowboarder who hung herself on her 18th birthday this year, spoke to her father literally the other day. She was a perfectionist, and all she did was feel like she'd let down the British team, and she wasn't going to achieve, she couldn't achieve perfection, and she'd let people down. So it's, as you can see, all these, the World Economic Forum identified it as an epidemic, which is where all the big stories are coming from at the moment. I just think if there was any other relevant stories. People like Alex Ferguson, this is out of interest for you as a leadership book about Alex Ferguson. He didn't motivate Man United by what they were going to achieve by winning. He literally motivated them by how people were going to think about them if they lost, about what would people think if they failed, because he knew he had a dressing room full of perfectionists. So how do you harness it? So I've learned, the big thing, so I discovered this in January. I've researched it, I've met psychologists. Now I'm going through the process. I've written this book about it, which is through my life. Every year I've done something stupid or mad. And you can get over it. And obviously the main thing, and the main, after this is a campaign idea that I'm hoping to get out next year, is just the awareness of what actually perfectionism really is. It is this personality disorder. It isn't a thing that you can choose to do or not do. It's something that sort of controls the person. So awareness is the first thing. I literally had to write myself a set of rules at the moment, the imperfect rules, which was like, I don't need to correct the kids all the time. I can stand outside the door. I can accept my wife leaving all the cupboard doors open. There's a small crossover with OCD. But it is possible to harness it and control it. And actually, I do think perfectionists make the best creatives because they're always vigilant about their life and what's happening around them. And so if you're in the creative industry, then you're aware of everything around you as your natural state. So hoping to do a campaign next year. There's actually a teen TV series that you might be aware of that's called Pretty Little Liars if you've got teenage girls. There's a follow-up called The Perfectionists out next spring. Same time as Comic Relief, same time as Mental Health Week, a few things. And so this gives sort of just an idea of the sort of thing that we're hoping to get celebrities to do. And then, if I press...
Home DVDs, they are meant for people, and you don't have to get mine. They are brilliant. You don't have to get mine. There are lots of other workout DVDs available, but they are short nowadays. So you can do like 10-minute workouts. You know, I like to do maybe 3 10-minute workouts, put a warm-up and a cool-down in there. That's about 40, 45 minutes. That's perfect. Well, this is amazing for arms.
So basically, we owe it to society to all be more truthful about ourselves and our lives. And actually, I really understand how hard it is to say sometimes, you know, I'm not perfect and everything's not going great and I have a tough life, but actually, when I do that, or I say, this is my 73rd selfie because I hated the other 72. People respond so well to it because actually what any of us show on any kind of social media is a complete lie. We're showing the very, very best of our lives, and we need to let kids and young people know that, because otherwise we're breeding an entire generation of perfectionists, and none of us can achieve perfection. We're all works in progress.
That'd do me. Thank you.